Part 1. They call it the Lance of Longinus, the spear that pierced the side of Christ. A relic so steeped in legend, so potent in its symbolic power, that men have killed and died for it for centuries. Emperors have coveted it. Kings have waged wars to possess it. Crusaders, their faith burning brighter than the desert sun, spilled their blood to safeguard it. And I stole it. The weight of that act, the sheer audacity of it, still presses down on me even now. I can feel the cold, metallic touch of the relic against my gloved hand, a phantom sensation that refuses to fade. It wasn't a sudden impulse, a rash decision fueled by greed or a thirst for notoriety. No, this was years in the making, a slow, meticulous plan hatched in the shadows, nurtured by an obsession that took root in my soul and twisted its way into every waking thought. It began, innocently enough, with a fascination for history. The dusty archives, the forgotten manuscripts, the whispered legends of lost artifacts. These were my playgrounds. I devoured everything I could find, immersing myself in the past, losing myself in the stories of those who came before. The Lance of Longinus, however, held a particular allure. Perhaps it was the inherent drama of the crucifixion narrative, the tangible connection to a moment that shaped the course of Western civilization. Or maybe it was the sheer mystery surrounding its authenticity, the countless debates and conflicting accounts that only served to deepen its mystique. Whatever the reason, the spear became my singular focus. I studied its purported history, tracing its journey through time, from the hands of a Roman centurion to the treasuries of Byzantine emperors, from the conquests of Charlemagne to the vaults of the Habsburg dynasty. Each new piece of information, each fragmented tale only fueled my desire to see the relic for myself, to touch it, to understand the power it held over the human imagination. I became a ghost, haunting the hallowed halls of museums and cathedrals, studying the security systems, noting the blind spots, learning the routines of the guards. I memorized floor plans, analyzed surveillance footage, and even befriended a retired curator, gleaning valuable insights into the relic's hidden location. My life, once filled with the mundane routines of an ordinary existence, now revolved around this single, all-consuming purpose. The moral implications of my actions, the potential consequences of my plan rarely entered my mind. I justified my obsession by telling myself I was merely a scholar, a seeker of truth. I wasn't stealing the lance for personal gain, I argued, but for the sake of history itself. I convinced myself that I was rescuing the relic from the clutches of an indifferent institution, that I was preserving it for future generations. These were the lies I whispered to myself in the dead of night, the justifications that allowed me to sleep, however fitfully. The night of the theft itself is a blur. I remember the adrenaline coursing through my veins, the heightened senses, the almost supernatural clarity of purpose. The meticulously planned movements, practiced countless times in my mind, now executed with a precision that surprised even myself. The disabled alarms, the bypass sensors, the unlocked vault, each step unfolded with an eerie smoothness, as if guided by an unseen hand. And then, there it was. The Lance of Longinus, bathed in the faint glow of the emergency lights, its aged metal gleaming with an almost ethereal light. It was smaller than I had imagined, more delicate, yet radiating an undeniable power. In that moment, as I reached out to touch the relic, time seemed to stand still. The weight of history, the echoes of the countless lives touched by this sacred object, pressed down on me. I felt a strange mix of awe and terror, of exhilaration and dread. This was it. The culmination of years of planning, the realization of a dream that had consumed my every waking thought. I had done it. I had stolen the holy relic the Crusaders died protecting. And in that very moment, I knew that my life would never be the same again. The world, as I knew it, had irrevocably shifted. I had crossed a line, stepped into a realm of shadows and secrets, and there was no turning back. The lance was mine, and its weight, both physical and metaphorical, was now mine to bear. The chanting continued, a low, thrumming vibration that seemed to emanate not from the relic itself, but from the very walls of my apartment. I'd wrapped the chalice, if it even was a chalice, its form was so alien, in a thick velvet cloth, tucked it away in a locked drawer beneath my bed, yet I could still feel its presence like a phantom limb. Sleep was a distant memory, replaced by a constant, gnawing unease. The next morning, the city outside felt different. The usual cacophony of car horns and construction was muted, replaced by an unnatural hush. People moved with a strange, synchronized slowness, their faces pale and drawn. A flock of pigeons scattered abruptly from a rooftop, their wings beating against the silence with an unsettling intensity. I chalked it up to paranoia, a side effect of my guilt and the sleepless night. At work, my colleagues mirrored the unsettling stillness I'd witnessed on the streets. Conversations were stilted, punctuated by long, uncomfortable pauses. Even Mrs. Henderson, the office gossip, seemed subdued, her usual boisterous laughter replaced by a low, almost mournful humming. When I asked her if she was feeling all right, she just stared at me with vacant eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. Then, she turned and walked away, humming that same unsettling tune. That night, the chanting intensified. It wasn't just a low hum anymore. It was a chorus of voices, whispering in a language I didn't understand, yet somehow, deep in my bones, I knew. The velvet cloth offered no barrier against the sound. It seeped into my dreams, twisting them into grotesque parodies of reality. I saw shadowy figures with elongated limbs and faces obscured by darkness, their hands outstretched, beckoning me towards a swirling vortex of shadows. I woke up in a cold sweat, the chanting echoing in my ears. The room was bathed in an unnatural moonlight, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the walls. My breath hitched in my throat. Standing at the foot of my bed, shrouded in darkness, was a figure, tall and impossibly thin. Its form seemed to flicker in and out of existence, like a flame struggling against a strong wind. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its gaze, a cold, penetrating stare that stripped away every layer of my being, leaving me exposed and vulnerable. Terror paralyzed me. I tried to scream, but my voice caught in my throat, a strangled gasp lost in the oppressive silence. The figure moved closer, its movements fluid and unnatural, defying the laws of physics. As it approached, the chanting grew louder, the whispers coalescing into a single, piercing shriek that resonated deep within my skull. I squeezed my eyes shut, burying my face in the pillow, willing it all to be a nightmare. But the chanting persisted, the shriek echoing in my mind, a constant reminder of my transgression. I felt a cold hand brush against my cheek, its touch sending a shiver down my spine. The figure was leaning over me now, its presence suffocating, its unseen face mere inches from my own. I opened my eyes. The figure was gone. The chanting had subsided, replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. The moonlight still streamed through the window, but the shadows had retreated, leaving the room bathed in an eerie calm. I lay there, frozen in fear, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Slowly, cautiously, I sat up. My gaze drifted towards the locked drawer beneath my bed. The key was still in my pocket, where I'd kept it clutched tight since the night I'd brought the relic home. A strange compulsion, a morbid curiosity, urged me to open the drawer to see if the chalice was still there. I fought against the urge, telling myself it was madness, that whatever evil I'd unleashed was connected to that unholy artifact. But the compulsion grew stronger, a magnetic pull drawing me towards the drawer. My hand trembled as I reached for the key. With a deep breath, I unlocked the drawer. The velvet cloth was still there, undisturbed. Hesitantly, I reached for it, my fingers brushing against the smooth, cool fabric. For a moment, I hesitated, a flicker of sanity reminding me of the terror I'd just experienced. But it was too late. The curiosity had consumed me. I pulled back the cloth. The drawer was empty. The relic was gone. A wave of nausea washed over me. I scrambled back from the bed, my heart pounding in my chest. The chanting began again, softer this time, almost a lullaby. But there was something different about it now. It wasn't coming from the walls, or from the relic. It was coming from Dawn inside me. The chanting grew louder, closer. It snaked under the door, a chilling counterpoint to the frantic thumping of my own heart. I pressed my ear against the cold, aged wood, trying to decipher the words, but they remained frustratingly indistinct. A guttural murmur that scraped against my sanity. It was Latin, I was almost certain, but a dialect so ancient, so perversely twisted, it sounded more demonic than divine. The small, iron-bound chest I'd stolen sat heavy on the dusty floorboards. Its intricate carvings, once fascinating, now seemed to writhe and shift in the flickering candlelight. Inside, nestled within layers of aged velvet, lay the Relic, the very thing the Crusaders had given their lives to protect. I still hadn't looked at it directly. I didn't teeter speeder. Something primal within me screamed that to gaze upon it would invite a doom I couldn't comprehend. The chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by a bone-chilling silence that was somehow worse. I held my breath, every muscle tensed, waiting. A soft scratching sound started at the base of the door, like nails dragging across the wood. My eyes darted to the single, barred window. The moon, a sliver of silver in the inky sky, offered no comfort. The courtyard below was shrouded in shadow, the gnarled branches of the ancient oak tree reaching out like skeletal fingers. Then, a voice. Low, resonant, speaking directly into the silence. "We know you have it." The words were spoken in perfect English, their clarity a stark contrast to the guttural chanting moments before. The voice was devoid of any emotion, cold and flat, yet it resonated with an unnerving power. It vibrated in my very bones. Terror, raw and icy, flooded through me. I stumbled back, clutching the chest to my chest, as if it were a shield. My mind raced, frantically searching for an escape. The door, the window, both were useless. I was trapped. The scratching at the door resumed, more insistent now, accompanied by a rhythmic thudding. Something heavy was being slammed against the wood. The door groaned under the assault, the ancient timbers protesting the violence. "Open the door," the voice commanded, its calmness more terrifying than any scream. "Give us what belongs to us." I didn't answer. I couldn't. The fear had choked the words in my throat. I backed further into the room, until my spine pressed against the cold stone wall. The candle on the table flickered wildly, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock my terror. The thudding intensified. The door splintered. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable, but the assault stopped as suddenly as it began. Another silence, thick with anticipation, descended. Slowly, I opened my eyes. The door remained intact, though scarred and battered. The scratching and thudding had ceased. The only sound was the frantic beating of my own heart. Then, a whisper, barely audible, slipped through the cracks in the door. "We are patient." The next few hours passed in a blur of terror. I huddled in the corner, clutching the chest. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside the window, sending jolts of fear through me. The chanting returned sporadically, always distant, always just out of reach, a constant reminder of the unseen presence that surrounded me. As dawn approached, exhaustion finally overtook me. I drifted into a fitful sleep, haunted by nightmares of hooded figures and chanting voices. When I awoke, the sun was streaming through the barred window, painting a rectangle of light on the dusty floor. For a moment, the terror of the night seemed like a bad dream. But then I saw it. A single, withered black rose lay on the floor just inside the door. Its petals were brittle and dry, its thorns sharp and menacing. A symbol, a warning. I knew then that I couldn't stay. I had to get out of the house, away from the Relic, away from the chanting voices and the unseen presence that haunted its halls. I grabbed the chest, my hands trembling. As I lifted it, a small piece of parchment fell out. I picked it up, my heart pounding in my chest. The parchment was old and brittle, the ink faded and barely legible, but I could make out a few words, scrawled in a spidery script. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. Some doors are best left unopened. I glanced at the black rose, then back at the parchment. The chilling words resonated with the events of the night. My curiosity had led me here, to this isolated house, to this terrifying predicament. And now, I feared, it might lead me to my doom. With a renewed sense of urgency, I made my way to the door, the chest heavy in my arms. I had to escape. I had to find a way to undo what I had done. But as I reached for the latch, I heard the chanting again, closer this time, right outside the door, and with it, a single, chilling word, spoken in that same emotionless voice. Too late! I awoke with a gasp, the taste of copper thick on my tongue. My hand instinctively flew to my mouth, coming away smeared with blood. The room was bathed in the weak, grayish light of pre-dawn, the same oppressive silence clinging to the air. The relic, still wrapped in the burlap, lay undisturbed on the bedside table. Its presence seemed to pulse with a low, rhythmic thrum that resonated deep within my bones. I stumbled to the bathroom, my reflection a gaunt, haunted caricature. The bleeding had stopped, but a deep, angry gash split my lower lip. I had no memory of injuring myself. The dream, however, or rather the nightmare, clung to the edges of my consciousness like a shroud, a vast, desolate plain, stretching to an infinite, crimson horizon. Twisted figures, their forms shifting and indistinct, whispered my name on the wind. And at the center, a towering obsidian obelisk, radiating an unholy power that made my very soul recoil. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to shake off the lingering dread. Logic whispered that it was just a dream, a product of stress and guilt. But a deeper, more primal instinct screamed otherwise. The relic was changing things, twisting reality, reaching into the very fabric of my being. The days that followed blurred into a nightmarish monotony. The bleeding incidents continued, small at first, a nosebleed, a cut on my finger, then escalating. I woke one morning to find my pillowcase soaked crimson, a deep laceration running across my forearm. The wound was clean, surgical almost, as if inflicted by a razor-sharp blade. But I had felt nothing. The nightmares, too, grew more vivid, more terrifying. The obelisk appeared in everyone, its malevolent presence growing stronger, closer. The whispers intensified, coalescing into a single, chilling voice that promised power and knowledge beyond my wildest comprehension, but at a price I instinctively knew I couldn't afford. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. The silence, once comforting, now pressed down on me, suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside my window set my teeth on edge. I felt watched, scrutinized by unseen eyes. I tried to distract myself, burying myself in work, avoiding the news, anything to escape the creeping paranoia, but it was no use. The relic's influence was insidious, weaving itself into the very fabric of my existence. Food tasted like ash in my mouth. Sleep offered no respite, only a descent into further madness. One evening, as I sat staring blankly at the television screen, unable to focus on the flickering images, I noticed something in the corner of my eye. A fleeting shadow, a flicker of movement just beyond the periphery of my vision. I whipped my head around, but there was nothing there. Just the darkened corner of my living room, the shadows stretching long and menacing in the dim light. I dismissed it as a trick of the light, a manifestation of my frayed nerves, but the feeling of being watched persisted, growing stronger with each passing hour. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye more frequently, dark shapes flitting across the walls, glimpses of movement in the reflection of the television screen. Then came the whispers, not the whispers in my dreams, but real whispers, just at the edge of hearing. Faint, sibilant murmurs that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. I strained to decipher the words, but they remained tantalizingly out of reach, a constant, unsettling hum beneath the surface of reality. Driven to the edge of sanity, I decided to do the only thing I could think of. I had to get rid of the relic. I couldn't bear its presence any longer. I grabbed the burlap-wrapped object and rushed out of my apartment, the cool night air a welcome reprieve from the oppressive atmosphere within. I drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring past in a kaleidoscope of color. I had no destination in mind, just a desperate need to put as much distance as possible between myself and the cursed object. Finally, I found myself on the outskirts of town, parked by a desolate stretch of highway overlooking a dark, brooding forest. I got out of the car, the relic clutched tightly in my hand. The whispers were louder now, swirling around me like a vortex of madness. I could almost feel the obelisk's pull, a magnetic force drawing me towards the dark woods. With a cry of desperation, I hurled the relic into the trees. It landed with a soft thud, disappearing into the undergrowth. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, the whispers stopped. The oppressive weight that had been crushing me for weeks lifted, leaving behind a hollow emptiness. I stood there, gasping for breath, the silence almost deafening after the constant barrage of whispers. I had done it. I had finally rid myself of the cursed object. But as I turned to walk back to my car, a new sound reached my ears. A low, guttural growl, emanating from the darkness of the woods. It was followed by another, and another growing closer, more menacing with each passing second. I fumbled for my car keys, my heart pounding in my chest. I had gotten rid of the relic, but something else had taken its place, something far more terrifying, and it was coming for me. I stole the holy relic. The Crusaders died protecting, Part 5. The chanting continued, a low, guttural drone that vibrated through the floorboards and into my bones. Sleep had become a distant memory, a luxury I could no longer afford. Every time I closed my eyes, the Crusader appeared, his face a mask of decaying flesh, his accusing eyes burning with cold fire. He no longer spoke, but his presence was enough, a constant, suffocating weight on my chest. The scent of decay permeated the house, clinging to the curtains, seeping into the very wood of the walls. It wasn't the smell of ordinary rot, but something ancient and unholy, like the exhalation of a tomb disturbed. The temperature had also plummeted, despite it being the height of summer. A perpetual chill hung in the air, making my breath fog even indoors. Driven by a desperate need to understand, I ventured into the attic again. The relic sat where I'd left it, nestled amongst the forgotten belongings of generations past. Its dull silver sheen seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light that filtered through the grimy attic window. I hesitated, a strange compulsion drawing me closer while a primal fear screamed at me to flee. This time, I touched it. The metal was icy, almost burningly cold. The moment my fingers made contact, the chanting intensified, resonating deep within my skull. The air shimmered around the relic, and the shadows in the attic corners seemed to deepen, coalescing into vaguely humanoid shapes that writhed and shifted just beyond the periphery of my vision. I snatched my hand back as if burned. A sharp pain shot up my arm, leaving a trail of icy numbness in its wake. Looking down, I saw a thin, black line snaking up my forearm, like a vein filled with ink. It pulsed faintly, spreading slowly towards my elbow. Panic seized me. I scrubbed at the mark, but it remained, a dark, indelible stain on my skin. Downstairs, the grandfather clock in the hallway began to chime. It chimed not 12 times as it should have for midnight, but 13. Each chime was distorted, metallic, like the scraping of metal against bone. With each clang, the shadows in the house grew more defined, solidifying into grotesque figures that lurked just beyond the flickering gaslight. I retreated to the living room, clutching the poker from beside the fireplace. The figures were there too, their forms hazy but undeniably present. They were tall and gaunt, clad in what looked like tattered remnants of Crusader armor. Their faces were hidden in shadow, but I could feel their eyes on me, cold and malevolent. The chanting reached a crescendo. The figures began to move, gliding silently across the room, their movements unnatural and jerky. One of them stepped into the pool of light, cast by the gas lamp. Its face was a skull, stripped bare of flesh, the empty sockets burning with the same cold fire I'd seen in the Crusader's eyes. It raised a skeletal hand towards me, its bony fingers tipped with what looked like blackened, sharpened claws. Terror choked me. I swung the poker, a desperate, futile act of self-preservation. It passed through the figure as if it were smoke, causing the form to dissipate for a moment before reforming, its skeletal grin widening. The others closed in, their cold presence suffocating me. I stumbled back, knocking over a small table. The sound seemed to amplify in the silence, echoing through the house like a gunshot. For a moment, the figures hesitated, their movements faltering. Then, from upstairs, a new sound emerged. A woman's scream, high and piercing, filled the air. It was followed by a heavy thud, and then silence. The figures in the living room turned towards the stairs, their shadowy forms flickering as if agitated. Then, as one, they glided towards the hallway, their movements swift and purposeful. I stood frozen, the poker slipping from my numb fingers. The woman's scream echoed in my ears. Who was she? Had she been drawn here by the relic, like me? Or had she been here all along, another victim of the house's dark secret? The chilling silence that followed the figures' departure was broken only by the faint, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock. 13 chimes. 13 figures. And now, a scream. A horrifying thought struck me. The chanting hadn't stopped. It had simply changed, become quieter, more focused. It was coming from upstairs. I knew I should run, flee the house, leave the relic, and never look back. But something held me fast. A morbid curiosity, a terrible need to understand what was happening. And, perhaps, a flicker of hope that I could still somehow undo what I had done. Taking a shaky breath, I picked up the poker and started towards the stairs. The black mark on my arm pulsed, burning with an icy fire that mirrored the dread in my heart. I stole the holy relic the Crusaders died, protecting. Part 6. The chanting continued, a low, thrumming vibration that seemed to emanate from the very stones of the apartment. I'd barricaded myself in the bedroom, the heavy oak door feeling flimsy against the unseen force pressing against it. The crucifix, the one I'd foolishly dismissed as a theatrical prop, now hung crookedly on the wall, spinning slowly, as if caught in some invisible vortex. Its silver surface was now dull, tarnished, almost weeping. The scent of decay intensified, thick and cloying, clinging to the back of my throat. It wasn't the smell of something dead, but something rotting from the inside out, something still alive but putrefying. My stomach churned, bile rising. My hands, still slick with the viscous fluid from the chalice, trembled uncontrollably. I scrubbed them frantically on my jeans, but the feeling, the greasy, clinging residue, persisted. It was as though the very substance had seeped into my skin, tainting me, marking me. I tried to pray. The words felt alien, distant, bouncing off some invisible barrier. It was as if some profound deafness had settled over the heavens, a divine disinterest in my plight. Then the whispers began. Faint at first, like the rustling of dry leaves in a distant graveyard, they gradually grew in volume, coalescing into distinct voices, murmuring just beyond the door. They spoke in a language I didn't understand, yet every syllable resonated with a primal fear that bypassed my conscious mind and burrowed deep into my soul. They spoke my name. Not the name my parents had given me, but the name carved into the chalice, the name I shouldn't have known. Terror, cold and absolute, gripped me. I pressed my back against the wall, shrinking away from the door as if it were a living thing, about to burst open and unleash the horrors waiting beyond. The chanting grew louder, more fervent, interwoven with the whispers, creating a cacophony of dread that hammered against my sanity. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, suffocating me. The air grew thick, heavy, almost impossible to breathe. The crucifix continued its slow, agonizing spin. I couldn't tear my eyes away. It seemed to be the epicenter of the growing horror, the focal point of some unholy ritual. The silver, now almost black, seemed to absorb the light, leaving the room in a deepening twilight. Then, a scratching sound. Soft, almost imperceptible at first, it grew steadily louder, more insistent. It came from beneath the door, from the other side, like fingernails dragging across wood. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The scratching stopped. A moment of silence, pregnant with dread, hung in the air. Then, a low, guttural growl, vibrating through the wood of the door, resonated in my chest. It was a sound that defied description, a sound that belonged to something ancient, something inhuman. The door shuddered, the wood splintered. A single, clawed finger, black and gnarled, poked through the widening crack. It twitched, beckoning, as if summoning me to join the nightmare unfolding beyond. I screamed, a primal, wordless shriek born of pure terror. I scrambled back, further into the corner, pulling my knees up to my chest, burying my face in my hands. The chanting, the whispers, the growling, the scent of decay, they all intensified, assaulting my senses, overwhelming me. Another claw joined the first, then another and another. The wood splintered and cracked under the relentless pressure. The gap widened, revealing a glimpse of the horrors beyond. A swirling darkness shot through with flashes of crimson light, from which the chanting and whispers seemed to emanate. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for oblivion, for the sweet release of unconsciousness, but the terror held me captive, forcing me to witness my own destruction. The door burst open. The chanting reached a crescendo. The whispers coalesced into a single, horrifying voice, speaking my name, the name on the chalice, the name I should never have known. I opened my eyes. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the swirling darkness, was a figure. Tall and gaunt, it was shrouded in a dark, flowing robe. Its face was hidden in the shadows, but 2 points of crimson light burned from where its eyes should have been. It raised a hand, long and skeletal, towards me. Its fingers, tipped with the same black claws that had ripped through the door, dripped with the same viscous fluid that stained my hands. The figure spoke, its voice a rasping whisper that seemed to claw at my sanity. "The chalice," it hissed. "It belongs to us. You have tasted its power. Now, you will pay the price." The room plunged into darkness. The chanting ceased. The whispers died away. Only the scent of decay, thick and suffocating, remained. And the sound of something dragging itself across the floor, slowly, inexorably, closer. I stole the holy relic the Crusaders died protecting. Part 7. The chanting intensified, a guttural, rhythmic pulse that vibrated the very air in the crypt. I pressed deeper into the shadows, the cold stone biting into my back. The relic, nestled in its pouch beneath my shirt, throbbed against my skin like a second, feverish heart. The chanting, once a distant drone, now felt like it was originating within my own skull. It twisted, contorted, shifting from Latin prayers I vaguely recognized to something far more ancient, far more unholy. I peeked around the crumbling pillar. The flickering candlelight illuminated the circle of hooded figures. They were closer now, their circle tighter, their chanting more fervent. I couldn't see their faces, shrouded as they were in the heavy dark cloth, but I could feel their gazes, like insects crawling across my skin. They were looking for me. They knew I was here. Terror, cold and slick, coated my throat. I had to get out. But the exit, a narrow archway on the far side of the crypt, felt impossibly distant, a lifetime away. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to bolt, to make a mad dash for freedom. But I knew with a chilling certainty that the moment I broke cover, I was dead. The chanting ceased abruptly, the silence as thick and suffocating as the darkness. One of the figures, taller than the rest, stepped forward. He raised his hands, and the others echoed the gesture. A low, guttural incantation, not Latin, not anything I'd ever heard before, spilled from his lips. The air crackled with a strange energy. The shadows themselves seemed to writhe and deepen. Then, a voice, amplified and distorted, boomed through the crypt. "Thief!" The word reverberated, echoing off the ancient stones. It felt accusatory, condemning, a pronouncement of doom. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't move, paralyzed by fear. "You have taken what is not yours," the voice continued, the distorted quality making it impossible to pinpoint its source. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You have disturbed the slumber of the sacred. Now you will pay the price." The hooded figures began to move, their movements slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic. They spread out, fanning through the crypt, their dark robes blending seamlessly with the shadows. They were hunting me. I had to do something, anything. My hand instinctively went to the relic beneath my shirt. It was pulsating with a strange energy, vibrating against my palm. Could it help me? Could this object, the source of so much death and fanaticism, offer me a way out? I closed my eyes, clutching the relic tight. I focused on its energy, trying to tap into the power that seemed to radiate from within. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a jolt, like static electricity, shot through my arm. My head swam. The chanting, which had begun again, a low, insidious murmur, seemed to fade. The shadows around me shifted, swirling, becoming less defined. I opened my eyes. The crypt was still there, the hooded figures still searching, but everything seemed different. The shadows were thinner, less oppressive. The air felt lighter, less charged with that terrifying energy, and the hooded figures, while still menacing, seemed less certain. Their movements were hesitant, their chanting less confident. It was the relic. It was protecting me, shielding me from their power. But how? And for how long? I knew I couldn't stay here. The relic's protection, whatever it was, wouldn't last forever. I had to escape. Taking a deep breath, I pressed myself tighter against the pillar, trying to blend into the shadows. Then, slowly, carefully, I began to move. I crept along the wall, staying low, my heart pounding in my chest. The hooded figures were still searching, their chants echoing around me, but they seemed less focused, less aware of my presence. The relic, warm against my skin, seemed to guide me, pulling me towards the exit. I reached the archway. The darkness beyond was absolute, impenetrable, but I had no choice. Taking another deep breath, I slipped through the archway and into the unknown. The chanting faded behind me. I was out of the crypt, but I wasn't safe. Not yet. I could still feel their presence, a cold, malevolent shadow clinging to the edges of my awareness. They were still hunting me, and they wouldn't stop until they got the relic back. I stumbled forward, my feet finding purchase on uneven ground. The air was damp and cold, smelling of earth and decay. I was in a tunnel, narrow and low-ceilinged, leading deeper into the earth. Where it led, I didn't know, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to keep moving. The darkness pressed in on me, thick and suffocating. The silence was broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing and the distant drip, drip, drip of water. I was alone, lost in the bowels of the earth, hunted by something I couldn't understand. And the relic, the object that had brought me here, the object that offered a flicker of protection, was also the thing that condemned me. As I stumbled through the darkness, a single thought echoed in my mind. What have I done? I stole the holy relic the Crusaders died protecting. Part 8 of 25. The chanting grew louder, seeping through the thick stone walls of the monastery like a noxious gas. It wasn't a hymn I recognized. Not Latin, not Greek, not anything remotely human. It slithered into my ears, wrapping around my thoughts. A cacophony of guttural sounds interspersed with high-pitched, almost insect-like chirps. My sleep, already thin and fragile, shattered completely. Sweat beaded on my forehead, chilling me despite the suffocating heat of the room. I scrambled out of bed, the relic, wrapped in the decaying shroud, clutched tightly in my hand. The room was darker than it should have been, the single flickering candle on the bedside table casting grotesque, dancing shadows. I felt a pressure in the room, a weight on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. It wasn't just the chanting, it was something else, something present. I stumbled towards the door, fumbling for the latch. My fingers brushed against something cold and slimy, and I recoiled, a choked gasp escaping my lips. I lit a match, holding it aloft. The brief flare illuminated a thick, viscous trail leading from the foot of my bed towards the door, glistening like a slug's trail. It pulsed faintly, emitting a faint, sickeningly sweet odor. Terror, raw and primal, flooded through me. I flung open the door and stumbled into the hallway, the chanting intensifying, the pressure crushing me. The hallway, usually bathed in the soft glow of moonlight filtering through the high windows, was shrouded in an unnatural darkness, as if the very air had been sucked out, leaving only a suffocating void. The trail continued, leading me deeper into the monastery. I followed it, drawn by a morbid curiosity, a terrified fascination. The air grew colder, the silence between the chants deeper, more pregnant with unseen horrors. I passed closed doors, each one seeming to hold its breath, listening, waiting. The shadows in the corners writhed and shifted, hinting at things just beyond my perception. The trail led me to the monastery's chapel. The heavy wooden doors were slightly ajar, the chanting pouring out, now accompanied by a low, rhythmic drumming. I pushed the doors open, the hinges groaning in protest, the sound amplified in the unnatural silence that followed. The chapel was lit by hundreds of flickering candles, casting a macabre glow on the frescoes adorning the walls. The monks, all of them, were gathered in a circle around the altar, their faces obscured by deep cowls. They chanted in unison, their voices rising and falling in a terrifying symphony of the unholy. But it wasn't the monks that made my blood freeze. It was what lay upon the altar. A figure, humanoid, but impossibly tall and thin, its limbs elongated and twisted at unnatural angles. Its skin was a sickly gray, stretched taut over protruding bones. Its head was bald, elongated, with eyes that burned with an unholy light, a malevolent intelligence that chilled me to the core. The trail ended at the foot of the altar, pooling around the figure's clawed feet. The creature raised a hand, its long, skeletal fingers tipped with sharp, black claws. The chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like a physical blow. The monks bowed their heads, their cowls obscuring their faces, their bodies trembling. The creature's burning gaze fixed on me, pinning me in place like an insect on a display board. A low growl emanated from its throat, a sound that vibrated through the very foundations of the monastery. I felt the relic thrumming in my hand, vibrating with a power that both terrified and enthralled me. Slowly, deliberately, the creature spoke. Its voice was not a voice at all, but a grating, scraping sound, like stones grinding together. It spoke in a language I didn't understand, yet I understood its meaning with chilling clarity. You have what belongs to us. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there, exposed under its malevolent gaze. But I was paralyzed, frozen by a fear so profound it had seeped into my very bones. The creature descended from the altar, its movements unsettlingly fluid, its joints clicking and popping with every step. The monks parted, creating a path for it, their heads still bowed. It stopped before me, its burning gaze inches from my face. I could smell its breath, a putrid stench of decay, and something else, something ancient and alien. It reached out a clawed hand towards the relic. "Give it back," the creature rasped, its voice resonating in my skull. My hand tightened around the relic. I didn't know why, but I knew I couldn't give it up. It was more than just an object. It was a shield, a lifeline in the face of this unimaginable horror. I shook my head, a small, defiant movement. The creature's eyes narrowed, the burning intensity amplified. A low growl rumbled in its chest, the air around us vibrating with its power. "You dare defy us?" the creature hissed, its voice laced with a promise of unimaginable pain. The monks began to chant again, their voices rising in a crescendo of terror. The shadows in the chapel deepened, swirling around the creature like a shroud. The relic in my hand pulsed, hotter now, almost burning my skin. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the core, that my defiance had sealed my fate. The game was over. The hunt had begun. I stole the holy relic the Crusaders died, protecting. Part 9. The chanting intensified, morphing into something less human, more guttural, a sound that scraped against the inside of my skull. The air in the crypt grew thick, cloying, and the flickering candlelight seemed to dance to a rhythm only it could hear. My breath hitched in my throat. The shadows elongated, stretching across the damp stone like grasping claws. I pressed myself harder against the cold wall, my back screaming in protest, the rough stone digging into my flesh. The scraping sound, distinct from the chanting, resumed. It seemed to be coming from beyond the altar, from the darkness that pooled behind the massive stone slab. I peered cautiously around the edge of the sarcophagus, my heart hammering against my ribs. The shadows shifted and writhed, playing tricks on my eyes. I saw movement, a flicker, a suggestion of something large and ungainly, but nothing concrete. My mind, already frayed and exhausted, struggled to process the information my senses were screaming. Then, a hand, pale, skeletal, the skin stretched taut over the bones, emerged from the darkness. It gripped the edge of the stone slab, its long, yellowed fingernails scraping against the granite. Another hand followed, then another, each one more grotesque than the last. Finally a head, its flesh withered and decayed. Its eyes, two hollow sockets, peered over the edge. The creature pulled itself up, revealing a body, emaciated and skeletal, draped in tattered remnants of what might once have been robes. It wasn't human, not entirely. Its movements were too jerky, too unnatural. Its skin, where visible, was a sickly green-gray, like something long dead. And the stench, a putrid mix of decay and something else, something alien and indescribably foul, rolled over me, choking the air from my lungs. Terror, raw and primal, flooded through me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my limbs felt leaden, my voice trapped in my throat. I was paralyzed, frozen by the sheer horror of the creature before me. It turned its head slowly, its empty socket seeming to fix on me. A low growl rumbled from its throat, a sound that vibrated deep within my chest. More figures emerged from the darkness, each as horrific as the first. They crawled, shambled, and dragged themselves over the stone slab, their movements accompanied by the sickening scrape of bone against rock. They formed a semicircle around me, their empty eyes boring into me, their guttural chanting growing louder. I was surrounded, trapped. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the sight, the smell, the sounds, but they were relentless, invading my senses, seeping into my very being. I felt a cold, clammy hand brush against my cheek, and a low, rasping whisper echoed in my ear. The vessel, prepared. I opened my eyes. The creature closest to me, the first to emerge from the darkness, stood inches from my face. Its skeletal hand, the one that had brushed my cheek, now held a small, ornate knife. The blade glinted in the flickering candlelight, reflecting the flames in a macabre dance. "The ritual must begin," the creature rasped, its voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. I flinched, trying to shrink away, but there was nowhere to go. The other creatures pressed closer, their skeletal fingers reaching, grasping. The chanting reached a fever pitch, drowning out all other sounds. The creature raised the knife, its blade poised above my chest. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. This was it. This was how it ended. Stolen relic, cursed crypt, sacrificed to what? I didn't even know what these creatures were. The blade touched my skin, cold and sharp. I held my breath, waiting for the searing pain, but it didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange pressure, a pulling sensation, as if something was being drawn from me. I opened my eyes. The creature was holding the knife against my chest, but it wasn't cutting. Instead, a thin, black tendril of smoke was rising from the point where the blade touched my skin, swirling upwards and disappearing into the creature's empty eye socket. The creature shuddered, its grip on the knife tightening. The chanting grew louder, more frantic. The other creatures pressed closer, their skeletal hands reaching, grasping, their empty eyes burning with a strange, hungry light. The pulling sensation intensified, draining the strength from my limbs, the warmth from my body. I felt lightheaded, dizzy. The crypt spun around me, the flickering candlelight blurring into a single, blinding point. I was losing consciousness, slipping away. And as darkness finally closed in, I heard a voice, not the guttural chanting of the creatures, but a different voice, deep and resonant, echoing from the depths of the crypt. "The vessel is open. I stole the holy relic. The Crusaders died protecting." Part 10. The chanting was louder now, emanating not just from the walls, but seemingly from the air itself, vibrating in my very bones. I fumbled for the flashlight, its beam slicing through the impenetrable gloom, revealing nothing but the endless, spiraling staircase. Down I descended, the air growing colder, heavier, tasting of something metallic, like old blood. The chanting swelled, punctuated by a rhythmic thumping, a sickening counterpoint to the frantic beating of my own heart. I thought of Father Michael, his warnings echoing in my mind, blending with the unsettling chorus. He'd spoken of a guardian, a protector of the relic, something ancient and malevolent. I'd scoffed then, blinded by greed and ambition. Now the chilling reality of his words sank in, icy claws clutching at my sanity. The thumping grew louder, the ground vibrating beneath my feet. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat, the flashlight beam shaking in my trembling hand. Far below, in the swirling darkness, I saw it. A pulsating red glow, expanding and contracting with the rhythmic thumping. It wasn't a light, not exactly. It was more like a heartbeat, visualized in the deepest crimson. and with every pulse, the chanting grew more fervent, more hungry. Terror, cold and sharp, pierced through me. I wanted to run, to climb back up the endless stairs, to return the relic and beg forgiveness. But the stairs seemed to stretch upwards infinitely, mocking my desperation. The chanting pulled me down, a siren song of dread. I had to see it. I had to know. The staircase ended abruptly in a vast, cavernous chamber. The air here was thick with the metallic scent, and the chanting was deafening. The red glow pulsed before me, emanating from a colossal, pulsating mass in the center of the chamber. My flashlight beam danced across its surface, revealing glistening, wet flesh, crisscrossed with pulsing veins thick as pythons. It was a heart, a gargantuan, beating heart, easily the size of a small car. It sat atop a crude altar of blackened stone, its rhythmic contractions shaking the very foundations of the chamber. Around the altar, etched into the stone floor, were symbols I recognized, the same unholy markings that adorned the box containing the relic. And then I saw them. Figures, huddled in the shadows at the edges of the chamber. Their forms were indistinct, shrouded in darkness, but I could feel their eyes, burning holes in my back. They were chanting, their voices coalescing into the monstrous chorus that had haunted me since I took the relic. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw more. Bones. Hundreds of them, scattered across the floor, piled against the walls. Skulls grinned up at me, empty sockets staring into my soul. Crusader armor, rusted and broken, lay scattered amongst the remains. These were the protectors Father Michael had spoken of, the ones who had given their lives to keep the relic safe. Now they were nothing more than offerings to this abomination. Suddenly the pulsing heart shuddered, and a wave of nausea washed over me. A voice, deep and resonant, filled the chamber, echoing through the bones and the chanting. It spoke in a language I didn't understand, yet I understood its meaning perfectly. It was a voice of hunger, of ancient insatiable power. The figures in the shadows began to move, slowly at first, then with growing speed. They converged on the altar, their chanting reaching a fever pitch. I saw them now, their faces pale and gaunt, their eyes burning with an unholy light. They were not human. Not entirely. Their skin was stretched tight over their bones, their movements jerky and unnatural. They were things animated by the pulsating heart, fueled by its dark energy. One of them, taller than the others, stepped forward. It wore the remnants of a Crusader's surcoat, the fabric tattered and stained with what I prayed wasn't blood. It raised a skeletal hand, pointing a bony finger directly at me. The chanting stopped. The heart's pulsating slowed, its crimson glow dimming slightly. A silence descended upon the chamber, heavy and oppressive. The tall figure spoke, its voice a dry rasp that echoed through the silence. "The vessel has arrived," it said, the words resonating with an unnatural power. "The offering is prepared." I knew what they wanted. They wanted the relic. They wanted me. And in that moment, surrounded by the bones of the fallen, bathed in the crimson glow of the monstrous heart, I knew that I was going to die. My hand instinctively went to the bag at my side, clutching the relic within. I could feel its warmth through the fabric, its power pulsing faintly. It was a warmth that had once felt exhilarating but now felt like a burning brand, marking me for sacrifice. The tall figure took another step forward, its skeletal hand reaching out for me, its eyes, burning with an unholy light, locked onto mine. And in their depths, I saw not malice, but something far more terrifying: expectation. Part 11. The whispers grow louder. The chanting continued, a low thrumming vibration that seemed to emanate not from the walls or the ceiling, but from the very air itself. It was a language I didn't understand, yet somehow, deep in my marrow, I felt I knew exactly what was being said. It was a plea, a desperate, yearning plea for something unholy. Sleep, as it had been for weeks, was a distant, unattainable luxury. My eyelids felt weighted down with lead, my body screamed for rest, but the chanting, the insidious whispers that now accompanied it, kept me tethered to consciousness. They slithered around me, serpentine voices just on the edge of audibility, whispering my name, twisting familiar phrases into grotesque parodies, Last night, I swore I heard my mother's voice, laced with something cold and malevolent, urging me to give it back. I'd barricaded myself in the attic room again, the single flickering candle casting dancing shadows on the dusty furniture. The relic, wrapped in the now threadbare velvet cloth, sat on a small table in the center of the room. It pulsated faintly, a rhythmic beat that mirrored the chanting, like a grotesque second heart beating within the house. I tried to pray, to recapture that sense of solace I'd once found in faith, but the words felt hollow, empty, like pebbles rattling in a dry well. My pleas went unanswered, lost in the oppressive atmosphere of dread that now permeated every inch of my existence. Driven by a desperate need to break the cycle, I decided to leave the house. The thought filled me with a primal terror, but the confinement was becoming unbearable. I reasoned that anything, even the unknown horrors that lurked outside, would be preferable to the slow, insidious torture within those walls. The moment I stepped outside, the chanting intensified, as if the house itself was lamenting my departure. The afternoon sun, which should have been a welcome sight, felt weak and ineffectual against the oppressive darkness that clung to the air. The trees swayed rhythmically, their branches skeletal fingers reaching out to claw at the sky. The familiar streets seemed distorted, unfamiliar, as if viewed through a warped lens. I walked aimlessly, trying to escape the suffocating pressure that seemed to follow me like a shroud. I passed Mrs. Henderson's house, her curtains twitching slightly, as if she were watching me from the shadows. Further down the street, Mr. Davies' dog, usually so boisterous, whimpered and cowered in its kennel, its eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own. The whispers followed me, growing louder, more insistent. They spoke of shadows and sacrifice, of ancient rituals and forgotten gods. They promised power, knowledge, and an end to the torment. But the price was always unspoken, yet somehow understood. I found myself drawn to the old church at the edge of town, the same one I'd visited weeks ago, searching for answers. The heavy oak doors were slightly ajar, and an unnatural stillness hung in the air. Hesitantly, I pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The church was deserted, bathed in the ethereal glow of the stained glass windows. The air was thick with the scent of incense, but underneath it, a faint metallic tang lingered. The smell of blood? The chanting was deafening now, resonating within the stone walls, vibrating through the very foundations of the building. I stumbled towards the altar, drawn by an unseen force. As I approached, I noticed something on the floor, something that made my blood run cold. Scrawled in what appeared to be dried blood, a symbol was etched into the stone. It was the same symbol that had been carved into the wooden box containing the relic. The same symbol that had haunted my nightmares. And then I saw them. Figures, cloaked in shadows, emerged from the darkness behind the altar. Their faces were obscured by deep hoods, but their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, a cold, malevolent fire. They moved slowly, deliberately, their movements unnaturally fluid, as if they were not bound by the constraints of flesh and bone. The whispers reached a crescendo, coalescing into a single, chilling voice that echoed through the church. "You have what we seek," the voice hissed, resonating with an ancient power. "Give it back, and the torment will end." I clutched the relic tighter, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I knew with a chilling certainty that I was trapped. They had found me, and they wouldn't leave until they had what they came for. The chanting grew louder, and the figures closed in. Part 12. The whispers grow louder. The chanting continued, a low thrumming vibration that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Sleep was a distant memory, replaced by a gnawing dread that clung to me like a second skin. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every creak of the old house a harbinger of something unspeakable. The whispers, once subtle, had grown louder, weaving themselves into the fabric of the silence, sometimes forming discernible words. "Return. It belongs. Here," they hissed, chilling me to the bone. I had tried everything to silence them. I stuffed cotton wool in my ears, played loud music, even screamed until my voice was raw, but the whispers persisted, seeping into my consciousness like poison. The relic itself sat wrapped in layers of cloth in the locked safe, a constant, pulsing presence in the room. I considered burying it, throwing it in the river, anything to rid myself of its malevolent influence. But an invisible force held me back, a chilling certainty that disposing of it wouldn't end the torment, it would only escalate it. Days bled into nights. I hadn't left the house since the visions started. The outside world felt too vast, too exposed. The sanctuary of my home had become my prison. Food ran low. The silence, broken only by the incessant whispering, was deafening. I felt a creeping madness taking hold, a splintering of my sanity. One evening, as the whispers reached a fever pitch, I noticed a change in the air. The room grew colder, the shadows deeper. The faint scent of incense, thick and cloying, filled the air. A single crimson rose materialized on the table before me, its petals unfurling, as if in slow motion. I stared at it, mesmerized, a primal fear gripping my heart. This was new. This was different. Suddenly, the whispers ceased. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. It was the silence of anticipation, the quiet before a storm. Then, a low growl resonated from the corner of the room, a guttural sound that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. My eyes darted towards the sound, but I could see nothing. The growl intensified, joined by a rhythmic scraping sound, like nails dragging across stone. I fumbled for the lamp, my hands trembling uncontrollably. As the light flickered to life, I saw it. A figure hunched in the shadows, its form obscured by the darkness. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs elongated and distorted, its head bowed low. The scraping sound continued, emanating from the figure itself. It was slowly, agonizingly, dragging itself across the floor, its movements jerky and unnatural. Terror seized me. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot by an overwhelming sense of dread. The figure continued to drag itself towards me, its movements growing faster, the scraping sound intensifying. As it entered the pool of light cast by the lamp, I could finally see its face. It was a skeletal visage, its skin stretched taut over bone, its eyes hollow, dark pits. A ragged, decaying robe hung loosely from its frame. Its jaw hung open, revealing rows of pointed teeth, and from its throat came a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down my spine. I scrambled back, knocking over the chair behind me. The figure paused, its head tilting slightly, as if listening. Then it spoke. Its voice was a rasping whisper, a chilling echo of the voices in my head. "You have something that belongs to us." My mind reeled. This wasn't a vision. This was real. This creature was real. And it wanted the relic. I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. The figure took a step closer, the scraping sound of its movement echoing in the silence. The stench of decay filled the air, thick and cloying. "You lie," it hissed, its voice dripping with malice. "We know what you have stolen." It reached out a skeletal hand, its fingers long and bony, and pointed towards the safe. "Return it," it growled, its voice rising in intensity. "Return it, or suffer." I cowered against the wall, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what it wanted. It wanted the relic, but I couldn't give it to them. I couldn't. I didn't know what would happen if I did, but I knew it would be something terrible. Suddenly the figure lunged, its skeletal hand reaching for me. I screamed, a primal scream born of pure terror, and scrambled to my feet, knocking over the lamp in the process. The room was plunged into darkness. The scraping sound intensified, followed by a sickening thud. Then, silence. I stood there, frozen in terror, listening, waiting. The silence stretched on, broken only by the frantic pounding of my heart. I fumbled for my phone, its screen casting a faint glow in the darkness. Slowly, cautiously, I turned towards the corner where the figure had been. It was gone. The whispers returned, louder than ever, filling the darkness with their chilling pronouncements. "You cannot hide," they hissed. "We will find you." I knew they were right. I couldn't hide. I couldn't run. They would find me, and they would take what they wanted. The crimson rose lay on the floor, its petals now wilted and black, a morbid reminder of the horror that had just unfolded. And in the oppressive silence, a new sound emerged, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from inside the safe. The relic was calling to them. And they were coming. I stole the holy relic. The Crusaders died, protecting Part 13. The chanting grew louder, resonating deep within my bones, a vibration that seemed to loosen my very teeth. The glyphs on the relic pulsed with an unsettling light, casting eerie shadows that danced and writhed across the walls of the abandoned monastery. My sanity, already fragile, felt like a thin sheet of ice over a dark, churning ocean. I clutched the relic tighter, the cold metal burning my palm. This was it. This was the point of no return. The air grew heavy, suffocating. The flickering candlelight, my only source of illumination, threatened to extinguish itself under the oppressive weight of the unseen presence. I could feel it now, a cold, probing energy slithering around me, testing, tasting. It felt ancient, inhuman, and filled with a malevolence that chilled me to the core. The chanting reached a crescendo, and the shadows on the walls solidified, morphing into grotesque, vaguely human shapes. Their limbs were elongated and twisted, their faces obscured by darkness, but I could feel their empty, hollow gazes fixed on me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body was frozen, trapped in the grip of an unseen force. Then, from the swirling darkness at the center of the room, a figure emerged. It was tall and gaunt, shrouded in a tattered cloak that seemed to absorb the light, leaving its features obscured. But I could see its hands, long, skeletal fingers tipped with claws that glinted in the candlelight. And in one of those hands, it held a wickedly curved dagger, its blade pulsing with the same unsettling light as the relic. Terror, pure and raw, flooded through me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The figure glided towards me, its movements unnervingly smooth and silent. The chanting lowered to a low, guttural hum, like the death rattle of a dying beast. As the figure approached, the pressure in the room intensified, making it difficult to breathe. The air crackled with an unnatural energy, and the smell of ozone filled my nostrils. I knew with a sickening certainty that this was the Guardian, the entity the Crusaders had died to protect the world from. And I, in my foolish greed, had unleashed it. The figure stopped a few feet away, its presence radiating an aura of immense power and ancient malice. I tried to speak, to plead for mercy, but my voice was trapped in my throat. The figure raised its hand, the dagger glinting in the candlelight. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But the blow never came. Instead, a voice, cold and resonant, echoed through the chamber. "You have awakened me," it said, the words seeming to vibrate within my skull. "After centuries of slumber, you have disturbed my rest." I opened my eyes, my body trembling. The figure was still there, the dagger poised inches from my chest. "Why?" I managed to croak, my voice barely a whisper. "Why haven't you killed me?" The figure lowered its hand slightly. "You possess the key," it said, its voice devoid of any emotion. "The key to unleashing the true power of the relic." My mind reeled. The true power? What could be more powerful than the unsettling events I had already experienced? The hallucinations, the chanting, the oppressive presence. It was all almost too much to bear. And now this creature was telling me there was more? What? What power? I stammered. The figure took a step closer, the shadows around it deepening. "The power to reshape the world," it whispered, its voice sending shivers down my spine. "To cleanse it of the unworthy, to usher in a new era of darkness." I stared at the figure, my mind struggling to comprehend the enormity of its words. Reshape the world? Cleanse it? Was this creature insane? I don't understand," I whispered. The figure let out a low, chilling chuckle. "You will," it said. "In time you will understand. For you are now my vessel, my instrument of change." It reached out, its skeletal fingers brushing against my cheek. The touch was icy cold, sending a wave of nausea through me. I wanted to recoil, to scream, but I was still paralyzed, trapped in the grip of its power. "The relic," the figure hissed, its voice close to my ear. "Give it to me." My hand, still clutching the relic, trembled. I knew I should resist, that I should fight back, but the figure's power was overwhelming. It was like staring into the abyss, and the abyss was staring back, beckoning me to join it. Slowly my fingers loosened their grip on the relic. The figure's hand, cold and skeletal, closed around it. As the relic left my touch, a wave of dizziness washed over me, and the chanting intensified, filling the air with a deafening roar. The room began to spin, and the shadows on the walls danced with renewed frenzy. I felt a sharp pain in my head, like a spike being driven through my skull, and then darkness. The last thing I heard, before the darkness consumed me completely, was the figure's chilling laughter echoing through the monastery, a sound that promised nothing but pain and despair. I stole the holy relic the Crusaders died, protecting Part 14. The whispers were louder now, a cacophony of rasping voices, circling my sanity like vultures. They slithered from the relic, no longer confined to the darkness but weaving themselves into the fabric of the day. I tried to block them out with music, with conversation, even with the droning white noise of the television, but they permeated everything, insidious and relentless. The visions, too, had intensified. They weren't the fleeting glimpses I'd experienced before, but prolonged, agonizing displays. I saw the Crusaders again, not in glorious battle, but in their final moments, their faces contorted in agony, their bodies riddled with arrows and blade wounds. Their eyes, vacant and pleading, fixed on me, accusing me of their fate. The smell of blood, thick and metallic, clung to the air, even in my sterile apartment. Sleep was a distant memory. Every time I closed my eyes, the relic's influence tightened its grip, dragging me into its macabre theater. I saw the dark ritual that had imbued the relic with its power, chanting figures cloaked in shadow, sacrificing something. I couldn't quite make out what it was, shrouded as it was in a swirling black mist, but the guttural cries that echoed from the vision chilled me to the bone. Driven to the brink, I decided to consult Father Michael again. He had been surprisingly understanding during our last conversation, acknowledging the existence of forces beyond human comprehension. His gentle demeanor, however, had been replaced by a palpable unease when I described the escalating phenomena. "It's feeding off your fear," he said, his voice low and strained, growing stronger with every moment you succumb to it. "But how do I stop being afraid?" I cried, my voice cracking. "It's everywhere, inside me, around me. I can't escape it." He remained silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the flickering candlelight. "There might be a way," he finally said, "a ritual of cleansing, an exorcism of sorts. But it's a dangerous undertaking. The entity attached to the relic is ancient and powerful. It won't relinquish its hold easily." "Anything," I pleaded, "anything is better than this." He nodded, a grim determination hardening his features. "Very well. Come to the church tomorrow at midnight. We'll begin the preparations then." The next day crawled by, each tick of the clock amplifying my dread. The whispers grew more insistent, the visions more vivid, the smell of blood more pervasive. I felt as though I was being slowly consumed, piece by piece, by an unseen predator. As darkness enveloped the city, I made my way to the church, the relic clutched tightly in my hand. The building loomed before me, a stark silhouette against the inky sky, the only illumination coming from a single stained glass window depicting the crucifixion. Father Michael was waiting for me inside, the church eerily silent and empty. He led me to the altar, where he had arranged a circle of candles, their flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. In the center of the circle lay an open book, its pages filled with arcane symbols and script. "Place the relic on the altar," he instructed, his voice barely above a whisper. My hand trembled as I obeyed, the cold metal of the relic burning against my skin. The moment it touched the altar, the whispers reached a fever pitch, swirling around us like a malevolent wind. The shadows on the walls seemed to writhe and contort, taking on grotesque and monstrous shapes. Father Michael began to chant, his voice resonating through the cavernous space. The words ancient and powerful, a language I didn't understand but felt deep within my soul. The candles burned brighter, their flames growing taller and fiercer, casting a flickering, otherworldly glow. The relic began to vibrate, a low hum emanating from its core. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with an unseen energy. I felt a pressure building in my chest, a tightening grip around my throat. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the church, a sound of pure agony and despair. I looked at Father Michael. his face contorted in a grimace of pain, his eyes wide with terror. He stumbled backward, clutching his chest, his chanting abruptly ceasing. From the relic, a dark, swirling mist began to rise, coiling and twisting like a living entity. It reached out towards Father Michael, its tendrils wrapping around him, pulling him towards the altar. The sacrifice, he gasped, his voice barely audible. It needs a sacrifice. The mist enveloped him completely, and he vanished with a final, choked cry. The church fell silent, the only sound the crackling of the candles and the frantic beating of my own heart. The relic lay still on the altar, the swirling mist gone, as if nothing had happened. But I knew, with a chilling certainty, that something had changed. The entity within the relic had tasted blood, and it was hungry for more. I stole the holy relic the Crusaders died, protecting. Part 15. The chanting grew closer. It wormed its way into my skull, a parasitic melody burrowing deeper with each echoing syllable. I barricaded the door with the heavy oak desk, its ancient wood protesting with a sickening groan. My hands, slick with a cold sweat that had nothing to do with the desert heat, fumbled with the rusted iron latch. The room was small, barely more than a forgotten storage closet tucked beneath the crumbling monastery. Dust motes danced in the sliver of moonlight that filtered through the single barred window high on the wall. It offered no escape, only a mocking glimpse of the star-dusted sky. My breath hitched in my throat. The chanting was right outside now, a guttural, dissonant chorus that seemed to vibrate the very stones of the monastery. I could hear the shuffle of sandaled feet, the metallic clink of something. Chainmail? Swords? The thought chilled me to the bone. Panic clawed at the edges of my reason. I had been a fool, a greedy, arrogant fool. The whispers had promised power, knowledge beyond human comprehension. All I had found was a spiraling descent into madness, pursued by something ancient and unforgiving. I clutched the relic, a small, intricately carved wooden box, no bigger than my hand, tighter against my chest. Its smooth surface pulsed with an unnerving warmth. Even now, even as I was cornered like a rat, I couldn't bring myself to discard it. A perverse fascination held me captive, a desperate hope that within its confines lay some answer, some escape from this nightmare. A heavy thud shook the door, rattling the latch. Splinters of wood rained down. Another thud, louder this time. The iron hinges screamed in protest. I scrambled back, pressing myself against the cold stone wall. My eyes darted around the cramped space, searching for any means of escape, any weapon to defend myself. There was nothing, just dust, cobwebs, and the suffocating sense of impending doom. The chanting stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. It was the silence of a predator, poised to strike. I could hear them breathing on the other side of the door, a collective rasp that sent shivers down my spine. Then, a voice. Deep, resonant, and chillingly familiar. It spoke in a language I didn't understand, yet somehow I knew exactly what it was saying. It was calling my name. The door burst inward, splintering wood exploding into the room. The moonlight illuminated figures clad in tattered Crusader armor, their faces obscured by shadowed helms. They moved with an unnatural grace, their movements jerky and unsettling. Their eyes, visible through the narrow slits in their helmets, glowed with an eerie, otherworldly light. They advanced slowly, deliberately, their hands outstretched. I cowered against the wall, the relic clutched tightly in my hand. Terror choked off my scream. They were not the Crusaders who had died protecting this artifact centuries ago. They were something else, something twisted, something possessed. As they closed in, I noticed something else, something even more horrifying. Their armor, once gleaming steel, was now covered in a thick, pulsating layer of flesh. It writhed and shifted, as if something was trying to break free from within. The stench of decay and something else, something indescribably foul, filled the air. One of the figures reached out, its gauntleted hand brushing against my cheek. The touch was cold, clammy, and sent a jolt of pure terror through my body. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But instead of pain, I felt emptiness. a hollowing out, a draining sensation. It was as if my very essence was being sucked away. I opened my eyes to see the figures leaning over me, their glowing eyes boring into mine. The chanting began again, softer now, almost a whisper. The relic in my hand pulsed with a sudden, intense heat. I looked down at it, my vision blurring. The intricate carvings seemed to shift and writhe, forming faces, screaming faces, contorted in agony. The box felt like it was burning my hand, but I couldn't let go. The chanting intensified. The figures pressed closer, their flesh-covered armor pulsating against me. The room spun, the moonlight fading, the chanting becoming a deafening roar, and then darkness. I awoke on the cold stone floor, the relic still clutched in my hand. The room was empty. The door hung open, revealing the desolate moonlit ruins of the monastery. The chanting was gone, replaced by the mournful howl of the desert wind. I staggered to my feet, my body weak and trembling. I looked down at the relic. The carvings were still, the heat gone. But something had changed. Something within me had shifted. I could feel it, a cold, empty space where something vital had been taken. I was no longer just a thief. I was something else, something less. And the whispers, once a promise of power, were now a chilling prophecy of my own damnation. The hunt was not over. It had just begun. The chanting intensified, echoing the frantic thumping of my own heart. I had wedged myself deeper into the alcove. The cold, rough stone, a meager comfort against the growing dread. The flickering candlelight, my only source of illumination, cast dancing shadows that writhed like tortured souls across the ancient monastery walls. The scent of mildew and something else, something acrid and metallic, hung heavy in the air. It smelled of blood. I clutched the relic tighter. Its smooth, cool surface offered a stark contrast to the feverish heat radiating from my skin. This damned thing. It had lured me here, to this forsaken place, with whispers of power and immortality, promises that now felt like a cruel jest. The power was real, terrifyingly so, but the immortality felt more like a curse, an eternity spent running, hiding, fearing. The chanting shifted, becoming more focused, directed. I knew, with a chilling certainty, it was directed at time. They were calling to me, the guardians, the things that lurked in the shadows just beyond the reach of my flickering candle. I pressed my hand against the cold stone wall, trying to find some purchase, some escape, but the alcove was a dead end. A voice, distinct and chillingly calm, cut through the chanting. It spoke in a language I didn't understand, yet somehow I knew what it was saying. It was calling me a thief, a desecrator. It promised retribution. The chanting stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. It was a thick, oppressive silence, the kind that precedes a storm. I held my breath, straining to hear any sound above the hammering of my heart. A slow, deliberate scraping echoed from the corridor outside the alcove. It sounded like something heavy being dragged across the stone floor. My candle sputtered, the flame shrinking down to a tiny blue flicker. The shadows deepened, swallowing the alcove in an almost tangible darkness. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. I fumbled for my lighter, my hand trembling so violently I almost dropped it. With a shaky click, the lighter sparked, casting a weak, wavering light. It was barely enough to illuminate the small space I occupied, but it was enough to see the hand. It was a skeletal hand, the bone bleached white and brittle-looking. It reached around the corner of the alcove, its long, bony fingers scrabbling against the stone. Another hand appeared, identical to the first, then a third, and a fourth. They moved with a disturbingly unnatural grace, pulling something large and shapeless into view. The lighter flickered again, threatening to die. I squeezed it tighter, desperate for the meager light it offered. The thing the hands were pulling came fully into view. It was a body, or what was left of one. The flesh was mostly gone, leaving behind a desiccated husk of bone and sinew. The skull, tilted at an unnatural angle, stared at me with empty sockets. Clutched in its skeletal hand was a rusted sword, the blade chipped and broken. Another Crusader. The hands released the body, letting it slump to the floor. Then, they slowly began to reach for me. terror, raw and primal, seized me. I scrambled back, pressing myself against the cold stone wall. The hands were inches away, their bony fingers twitching. I could smell the dust of ages clinging to them, the faint, lingering scent of decay. The relic pulsed in my hand, radiating a strange warmth. It vibrated with a low hum, a sound that seemed to resonate deep within my bones. The hands paused, their movement hesitant. They seemed wary of the relic. An idea, desperate and reckless, formed in my mind. I held the relic out, closer to the hands. They recoiled slightly, as if burned. The humming intensified, the relic glowing with a faint, ethereal light. The hands retreated further, disappearing back into the darkness. I stayed there, frozen in place, the relic clutched tightly in my hand, for what felt like an eternity. The silence returned, broken only by the frantic beating of my own heart. I didn't know what I had done, but I knew one thing: the relic was the key. It was both my prison and my protection. Slowly, cautiously, I began to move, using the lighter to guide my way. The corridor stretched out before me, disappearing into the impenetrable darkness. I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to find a way out, a way to escape this cursed place. But the relic, the very thing that had brought me here, was now my only hope. As I crept through the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The silence was too perfect, too still. It felt like the monastery itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a mistake. And in the shadows, just beyond the reach of my flickering light, I could sense them, the guardians, waiting patiently for their chance to reclaim what I had stolen. They were biding their time, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that they wouldn't wait forever. The relic had bought me some time, but the game was far from over. I stole the holy relic the Crusaders died protecting. Part 17 of 25. The chanting grew louder, closer, weaving its way into the fabric of the crypt, vibrating the very stones beneath my feet. The air, already thick with the scent of mildew and decay, now carried a new, cloying sweetness, like overripe fruit rotting in the sun. My torch sputtered, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist with malevolent intent. I pressed myself further into the alcove, the rough stones scraping against my back, the cold seeping into my bones. The small wooden cross I'd clutched since the beginning felt slick with sweat in my hand. It offered little comfort. The procession entered the crypt. Not a grand, triumphant parade as I had imagined, but a slow, shuffling crawl of figures shrouded in dark robes. Their faces were hidden by deep cowls, but I could sense their presence, a weight pressing down on the air, sucking the very breath from my lungs. They moved with an unnatural synchronicity, each step measured, deliberate, as if controlled by a single, unseen puppeteer. Their chanting, now deafeningly loud, resonated deep within my chest, a visceral vibration that made my teeth ache. They carried no torches, no lanterns, yet the crypt was illuminated, bathed in an eerie, pulsating light that emanated from the relic itself. It rested on a makeshift altar at the center of the chamber, its golden surface shimmering, the ruby at its heart pulsing with a sickeningly sweet light. It seemed larger now, more imposing, radiating a palpable power that made my stomach churn. The robed figures formed a circle around the altar, their chanting intensifying, the sweet, rotting smell growing stronger. I felt a strange pull towards them, a morbid curiosity that warred with the primal fear gripping my heart. I wanted to see their faces, to understand what they were doing, what they wanted. Slowly, one of the figures stepped forward. He raised his hands, and the chanting ceased abruptly, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. He reached into the folds of his robe and pulled out a long, curved dagger. The blade gleamed in the unnatural light, reflecting the pulsing red of the ruby. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through me. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the core, that this was no ordinary ritual. This was a sacrifice. The robed figure turned towards the altar, and for the first time I saw his face. It was pale, gaunt, the skin stretched taut over the bones. But it was the eyes that held me captive, eyes that burned with an unnatural fire, eyes that reflected the pulsing red light of the ruby. He raised the dagger high above his head, the blade catching the light, and then, with a swift, brutal movement, plunged it into his own chest. A choked gasp escaped my lips. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed, frozen in place by the sheer horror of the scene unfolding before me. The robed figure crumpled to the ground, his blood staining the stone floor a dark, viscous black. The chanting began again, low and mournful at first, then building in intensity, rising to a frenzied crescendo. The other robed figures stepped forward, one by one, each taking the dagger and repeating the gruesome act. The air grew thick with the metallic tang of blood, the sweet, rotting smell overwhelming. The stone floor became slick, the walls splashed with dark, spreading stains. I watched, horrified, as the robed figures fell one after another, until only one remained. He stood before the altar, the dagger clutched in his hand, his face bathed in the pulsing red light. He looked directly at me, his burning eyes locking with mine. A slow, chilling smile spread across his lips. He raised the dagger. I knew, in that moment, that I was next. My mind screamed, my body thrashed against the invisible bonds that held me captive. I wanted to run, to hide, to disappear, but I couldn't. I was trapped, a helpless witness to this horrifying ritual, the next victim in line. He took a step towards me, his eyes never leaving mine. The chanting reached a fever pitch, the air vibrating with a palpable energy. The ruby pulsed, its light growing brighter, more intense, until it seemed to fill the entire crypt. He raised the dagger higher, the blade shimmering in the crimson light. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. But the blow never came. Instead, I heard a deafening roar, a sound unlike anything I had ever heard before, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. The ground shook beneath me, the walls of the crypt trembled, the chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by a chilling silence. I opened my eyes. The robed figure was gone, the altar was empty, the relic was gone. In their place stood a figure wreathed in shadow, a figure of immense size and power, its form shifting and swirling like smoke in the wind. Two glowing red eyes pierced the darkness, fixed on me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that whatever this was, it was far more terrifying than anything I had encountered before. The relic was gone, but the true horror had only just begun. The chanting intensified, resonating through the very bones of the crumbling monastery. The glyphs on the relic pulsed with a sickly inner light, casting grotesque shadows that danced like demons across the cracked stone walls. I clutched the relic tighter, my knuckles white, the cold metal burning my skin. The monks, their faces obscured by cowls, moved with an unnerving synchronicity, their voices rising in a crescendo that threatened to shatter the fragile remnants of my sanity. Fear, raw and primal, clawed at my throat. The shadows seemed to coalesce, taking on more defined shapes, twisted, skeletal figures with eyes that glowed with the same unholy light as the relic. They stretched out towards me, their ethereal fingers scraping across the floor, the sound like nails on a chalkboard echoing in the oppressive silence between the chants. I stumbled back, my foot catching on a loose stone. I fell, the impact jarring the relic in my grasp. A wave of nausea washed over me, the chanting growing louder, the shadows closer. I scrambled backwards, pressing myself against the cold stone wall, the relic clutched to my chest like a shield. The monks stopped chanting abruptly. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise. It hung heavy in the air, thick with anticipation, with menace. Slowly the monks turned, their cowls shifting, revealing nothing. Empty hollows where faces should have been. Just the pulsating light of the relic reflecting in the dark, cavernous depths of their hoods. Terror choked me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my limbs felt leaden, my voice trapped in my throat. The faceless monks began to advance, their movements slow, deliberate, their empty hoods fixed on me, like predators locking onto their prey. The shadows, now fully formed, writhed around them, whispering promises of oblivion. The relic pulsed in my hand, hotter now, almost unbearable, The glyphs seemed to shift and writhe as if alive. A voice, ancient and chilling, whispered in my mind, not through my ears, but directly into my consciousness. Asterisk, release me. Asterisk, it hissed. Asterisk, and the suffering will end. The temptation was overwhelming. To relinquish the relic, to sever the connection, to escape the suffocating fear. But a deeper instinct, a primal survival mechanism, screamed against it. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that releasing the relic wouldn't end the suffering, it would only begin it. For me, and for the world. I closed my eyes, squeezing the relic tighter, trying to block out the whispering voice, the advancing monks, the writhing shadows. I focused on my breath, trying to regain some semblance of control. I had to escape. I had to find a way out of this nightmare. When I opened my eyes, the monks were closer, their empty hoods inches from my face. I could feel their cold, ethereal breath on my skin. The shadows reached out, their skeletal fingers brushing against my arms, sending shivers of pure terror down my spine. Desperation fueled a surge of adrenaline. I pushed myself off the wall, scrambling past the monks, the shadows snapping at my heels. I ran blindly through the crumbling monastery, the chanting starting again, fainter now, but no less menacing. I stumbled through darkened corridors, the air thick with the smell of decay and dust. The monastery seemed to stretch on forever, a labyrinth of crumbling stone and shadow. I could hear the monks behind me, their slow, deliberate footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. I saw a flicker of light ahead and lunged towards it, bursting through a rotting wooden door into what appeared to be a small chapel. Moonlight streamed through a shattered stained glass window, illuminating a dusty altar. I slammed the door shut, the wood groaning under the impact, and fumbled for a bolt, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no bolt. The pounding on the door started immediately, low and rhythmic, like a death knell. I pressed my back against the door, the relic burning against my chest. The wood splintered, a skeletal hand reaching through, its fingers grasping for me. I stumbled back, the altar looming behind me. On it lay a single, ancient book, its cover bound in worn leather. Driven by a desperate hope, I grabbed the book, flipping through its brittle pages. The text was written in a language I didn't recognize, a series of strange symbols and glyphs. But as I flipped through the pages, one symbol caught my eye. It was the same symbol that was etched on the relic, the one that pulsed with that unholy light. Beneath it, a single word, written in Latin, stood out. Clavis. Key. The pounding on the door intensified, the wood splintering further. The skeletal hand reached out again, closer this time, its icy fingers brushing against my cheek. I looked down at the book, at the symbol, at the word clavis. A sudden understanding, a terrible realization dawned on me. The relic wasn't the object of power, it was the key. And the monastery wasn't a prison, it was a lock. The door burst open. The faceless monks surged into the chapel, the shadows swirling around them. The chanting reached a deafening crescendo, the relic burning hotter than ever in my hand. And as I stared into the empty hoods of the monks, as the shadows closed in, I knew with a chilling certainty what the relic unlocked. It unlocked hell. The whispers had become a chorus, a cacophony of rasping voices that burrowed into my skull, echoing my deepest fears and regrets. Sleep had become a distant memory, a luxury I could no longer afford. My eyes, bloodshot and burning, darted around the room, searching for the source of the incessant murmuring, yet finding nothing but the oppressive shadows that clung to the walls like a second skin. Bam! The relic, nestled within its velvet-lined case on the bedside table, pulsed with a faint, sickly light. It was no longer the dull, tarnished silver I'd stolen from the crypt. Now it shimmered, almost alive, a grotesque parody of divine radiance. I could feel its malevolent energy radiating outwards, infecting the very air I breathed. My reflection in the darkened window pane was barely recognizable, gaunt, hollow-cheeked, with dark circles etched beneath my eyes. I looked like a ghost haunting my own life. The once vibrant spark in my eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a dull, haunted emptiness. Driven by a desperate need to silence the voices, I'd tried everything. Earplugs, noise-canceling headphones, even burying my head beneath my pillow. Nothing worked. They permeated every barrier, slithering into my consciousness, twisting my thoughts, amplifying my guilt. They spoke of the Crusaders, their mangled bodies piled before the altar, their sacrifice in vain. They spoke of the darkness I had unleashed, the ancient evil I had awakened. They spoke of my impending doom. Tonight, however, the whispers were different. They were clearer, more focused, laced with a chillingly seductive tone. "Return it," they hissed, their voices weaving together like the strands of a venomous serpent. "Return it to its rightful place. It's not too late." My heart pounded in my chest. Could it be true? Could I undo what I had done? The idea, however tempting, was quickly overshadowed by a wave of terror. I had tried to return the relic once. The journey back to the crypt had been a nightmare, plagued by grotesque visions and near-fatal accidents. I had barely escaped with my life. The thought of attempting it again filled me with a primal fear. "No," I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. "I can't. It's too dangerous." The whispers intensified, growing louder, more insistent. "You have no choice," they shrieked. "It's the only way. Return it, or face the consequences." The room grew colder, the shadows deepening, pressing in on me like suffocating hands. The relic pulsed brighter, its sickly light casting grotesque, dancing shadows on the walls. Suddenly, a sharp, metallic clang echoed from the living room. My breath hitched in my throat. I was alone in the house. Had the whispers manifested into something more tangible? Something physical? Clutching a heavy iron poker I'd found by the fireplace, I crept towards the living room door, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Each step felt like wading through molasses, the air thick with dread. I reached the door, hesitated for a moment, then flung it open. The living room was bathed in the eerie glow of the moon, the shadows long and distorted. Nothing seemed out of place. Then I saw it. A single withered rose lay on the floor near the window, its petals black and brittle. I hadn't seen a rose like that since the crypt. A wave of nausea washed over me. The whispers were no longer confined to my mind. They were invading my reality, twisting it, warping it into something sinister and terrifying. "Return it," the whispers hissed, their voices closer now, right behind me. I spun around, the poker raised, ready to defend myself, but there was nothing there. Just the empty room and the oppressive silence broken only by the frantic beating of my own heart. I stumbled back, my eyes fixed on the black rose, my mind reeling. This wasn't a game anymore. This was a war, and I was losing. The relic had a hold on me, and it wasn't letting go. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles and plunging the room into darkness. A blood-curdling scream echoed through the house, followed by the shattering of glass. I fumbled for the light switch, my fingers trembling uncontrollably. The lights flickered on, revealing the shattered window and the empty space where the black rose had lain. The whispers were gone, replaced by an unnerving silence that was somehow even more terrifying. I knew then, with a chilling certainty, that I had no choice. I had to return the relic. Even if it meant facing the horrors that awaited me in that cursed crypt, it was the only way to escape the torment that was consuming me. I had to try. I grabbed the relic, its cold metal burning my hand, and stumbled towards the door, the image of the black rose seared into my mind. As I stepped out into the cold night air, I knew, deep in my heart, that this was just the beginning of the true horror. The chanting intensified, a guttural resonance vibrating the very marrow in my bones. The air in the crumbling cathedral, once stifling, now crackled with an unholy energy. I clutched the relic tighter, the cold metal biting into my skin. It pulsed with a sickening rhythm, mirroring the chanting, mirroring the dread that coiled in my gut like a venomous serpent. The shadows, once playful wisps at the periphery of my vision, now coalesced into writhing humanoid forms. They stalked the edges of the flickering candlelight, their movements jerky and unnatural. Their whispers, no longer gibberish, began to form discernible words, echoing the Latin phrases of the chanting priests, words of damnation, of sacrifice, of a hunger older than time. Terror, raw and primal, clawed its way up my throat, choking off any attempt at a scream. My legs, leaden with fear, refused to obey my desperate commands to flee. I was trapped, bound not by physical restraints, but by the sheer oppressive weight of the unfolding horror. The chanting reached a crescendo, the shadows solidified, their hollow eyes burning with an unholy light. The priests, their faces contorted in ecstatic agony, raised their arms towards the shadowed altar. And then, silence. A silence more terrifying than the cacophony that preceded it. The air hung heavy, thick with anticipation. A single drop of blood splattered onto the altar, followed by another and another, forming a crimson pool. The metallic scent of blood filled the air, mingling with the cloying sweetness of incense. A figure emerged from the shadows behind the altar. Tall and gaunt, cloaked in darkness, it moved with a terrifying grace. Its face was hidden by the deep cowl, but I could feel its gaze, cold and piercing, fixed on me. It raised a skeletal hand, its fingers long and gnarled, and pointed directly at me. The relic in my hand pulsed violently, burning my skin. I tried to drop it, to fling it away, but my hand was locked in a rigid grip, an unseen force holding me captive. "The vessel has been found," a voice rasped, emanating from the hooded figure. The voice was ancient, echoing with the weight of millennia. It resonated within my very being, shaking the foundations of my sanity. "The gate will be opened," the voice continued, each word dripping with malice. "And the promised one shall return." The shadows surged forward, their whispers turning into screams of anticipation. They reached out with their skeletal hands, their touch promising not pain, but oblivion. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But it didn't come. Instead, a different voice, weak but familiar, pierced the oppressive silence. "Leave him be!" My eyes snapped open. Father Michael, pale and frail, stood at the entrance of the cathedral, his hand clutching the doorframe for support. He looked older, weaker, as if years had been stolen from him in the span of a few hours. The hooded figure turned its attention to the priest. The shadows hesitated, their movements faltering. A low growl echoed through the cathedral, emanating from the hooded figure, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. "You interfere," the voice hissed, the air around the figure shimmering with dark energy. "He is not the vessel," Father Michael said, his voice trembling but resolute. "He is merely a pawn, an unwitting thief." "The relic is his," the hooded figure countered. "The blood calls to the blood. He is the key." "No," Father Michael said, taking a shaky step forward. "The blood calls to the rightful heir, and he is not here." The hooded figure was silent for a moment, the shadows swirling around it in agitated patterns. The air crackled with tension, the silence heavy with unspoken threats. "You know the price of defiance, old man," the voice finally said, the words dripping with venom. "I do," Father Michael replied, his voice gaining strength, "and I am willing to pay it." He then turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Run, Daniel," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Run, and don't look back. Destroy the relic, it's the only way." The hooded figure let out a roar of fury, and the shadows lunged forward, engulfing Father Michael in a wave of darkness. His scream echoed through the cathedral, a sound that would forever haunt my nightmares. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran, the relic burning in my hand, the screams of the damned echoing in my ears. I ran through the crumbling corridors, past the leering gargoyles, past the flickering shadows. I ran as if the hounds of hell were nipping at my heels, because perhaps they were. Father Michael had bought me time, precious time, with his life, and I wouldn't waste it. I had to destroy the relic. I had to close the gate, before it was too late. The cathedral crumbled behind me, a monument to my folly, a testament to the horror I had unleashed. And as I ran, I knew with a chilling certainty that this was only the beginning. Part 21. The whispers grow louder. The chanting continued, a low thrum that vibrated not just in the air but in my very bones. It was a language I didn't understand, yet every syllable resonated with a chilling familiarity, as if it were a primal tongue I had forgotten ages ago. The darkness pulsed with it, the shadows swaying in a grotesque dance, mimicking the unseen choir. My flashlight beam, a pathetic sliver of defiance against the oppressive gloom, trembled in my grasp. I was deeper in the catacombs than I'd ever been, the air thick, with the musty scent of decay and something else, something acrid and metallic, like the phantom smell of blood. The crucifix, nestled uncomfortably against my chest beneath my shirt, seemed to burn colder, its metal biting into my skin. The silence between the chants had grown shorter, the pauses less frequent, until it felt like a single, continuous drone pressing against my sanity. I had tried retracing my steps, desperately seeking the passage that led back to the hidden entrance of the chapel, but the twisting tunnels all looked the same, a labyrinth of cold stone and suffocating darkness. Panic gnawed at me, a ravenous beast threatening to tear its way out. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking horror, every echo amplified my fear. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me deeper than the damp air, that I wasn't alone. I stopped, forcing myself to breathe slowly, to fight the rising tide of terror. The chanting swelled, closer now, as if the unseen choir were advancing through the tunnels. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the approaching doom. I pressed on, driven by a desperate hope, a sliver of light in the encroaching darkness. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern. My flashlight beam struggled to penetrate the immense space, revealing only a fraction of its size. Giant stalactites hung from the ceiling like the teeth of some monstrous beast, and the floor was littered with debris, hinting at a forgotten purpose. In the center of the cavern, a single pillar rose towards the darkness, its surface etched with strange symbols that seemed to shift and writhe in the flickering light. And atop the pillar, bathed in an unnatural luminescence that seemed to emanate from within, rested a shallow bowl. The chanting reached a crescendo, resonating through the cavern, bouncing off the walls and amplifying the sense of dread. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I had found what I was looking for, or perhaps, more accurately, what it had been looking for. A figure emerged from the shadows, its form indistinct, obscured by the darkness and the wavering light. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, its presence radiating an aura of ancient power. As it drew closer, I could make out more details: the flowing robes, the skeletal hands, the skull-like face partially concealed by a hood. It was the figure from my nightmares, the guardian of the Relic, the thing the Crusaders had died to keep contained. Terror paralyzed me, rooting me to the spot. My breath hitched in my throat, my mind screaming, but no sound escaped my lips. The figure stopped before the pillar, its hollow eyes fixed on the bowl. Then it turned its gaze towards me. A voice, raspy and ancient, echoed through the cavern, speaking in the same language as the chanting, yet somehow I understood. "You have brought it," it said, the words resonating with a chilling resonance. "The vessel is prepared." The figure gestured towards the bowl, and for the first time I noticed the dark, viscous liquid that filled it. It pulsed with a faint, internal light, mirroring the unnatural glow emanating from the pillar. My gaze was drawn to it, a morbid fascination overriding my fear. "The blood of the unworthy," the figure rasped, its voice dripping with malice, "the key to unlocking the gate." The chanting intensified, the shadows swirling around the figure like a vortex of darkness. I knew what it wanted. It wanted the crucifix, the relic I had stolen. It wanted to complete the ritual, to open the gate, to unleash whatever horrors lay beyond. My hand instinctively went to the crucifix beneath my shirt, clutching it tightly. I couldn't let it happen. I had to stop it. But how? I was trapped, alone in the darkness, facing an entity of unimaginable power. Then I heard another whisper, faint and distant, yet somehow cutting through the oppressive chanting. It wasn't the voice of the figure, nor the chanting of the unseen choir. It was a different voice, a familiar voice, a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Daniel," the whisper said, my name a breath of hope in the suffocating darkness. "Don't give it to him. Don't."